A National Guardsman in North Carolina planned to avenge the death of his mother by hiring a hitman to murder her killer.
What I can say with complete honesty, sincerity, from the bottom of my heart, is I forgive you. My children forgive you. Our family forgives you.
Years after this heartfelt statement of forgiveness given at his mother's funeral, the soldier bought an AR-15 and at least one other weapon and requested a base transfer, all to be stationed closer to the man responsible for his mother's death.
He clearly had some reason to act on this now.
42-year-old Michelle Barlow was killed on March 22, 2016, when a dump truck driven by Donald Caulder Jr. crashed into her minivan. Local news outlets report Caulder was pulling a trailer and had not correctly attached the brakes to the truck. He was also reportedly distracted at the time. He was later charged with a misdemeanor count of death by vehicle and sentenced to 12 months of probation. At the time, there was an outpouring of support for the Barlows family. She'd been an English teacher at Wake Forest High School in North Carolina and was beloved by the district. Her husband, Michael Barlow, spoke to local news outlets in the days after her death, saying he forgave Caulder.
He's hurting too. He doesn't deserve to be tormented any more than we do.
Michael told news outlets that Michelle's memory would live on through their daughter and son, Rhett Barlow.
They get to, in themselves, live out what Mama had already modeled. So obviously in them, yeah, her legacy will live on.
Cut to November of last year when a now 22-year-old Rhett Barlow inquired about hitman services to murder Caulder. Tom Holt, a professor in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University, says it's likely Rhett Barlow didn't actually feel the forgiveness his father projected.
It's very probable. Taking this kind of action would suggest that if they felt some degree of forgiveness earlier, they have changed their mind.
Holt's area of expertise is internet crime. He's done extensive research in the area of hitmen and the dark web.
Most legitimate hitmen are identified via social connections. So it's someone that you know through someone else. Most likely the person has either been in prison or has military experience or both, and are flexible enough ethically to be willing to be paid in order to try to hurt someone. And the internet has created a cottage industry of people who claim to be hitmen but are absolutely not.
Why would somebody claim to be a hitman but not actually be one? Is it law enforcement to try to catch people, or do random people just do this?
There are a few people who have advertised on Craigslist and have done so in more or less legitimate ways, but they're hard to find and they're inconsistent. And so we don't have evidence to tell us how many people have advertised on Craigslist. But we know there's a lot of websites on the dark web where people say that they're hitmen and they'll accept payment in advance via Bitcoin or some other kind of cryptocurrency. And they do this because there's a perception that everything on the dark web is real. And so as a scammer, I can set this up and receive passive income because someone, it may not be many, but if I get 2 or 3 every quarter, I can make a fair amount of money doing virtually nothing except setting up a website.
In the case that someone is scammed out of a hit, the situation usually won't be reported because the act of hiring a hitman itself is illegal.
That is something that we see across the board when we look at all kinds of cybercrime markets, whether it's for stolen credit card numbers or drugs or things like Hitman, is that you want to appear legitimate, but in the event that your customer is ripped off, they have nowhere to go. They cannot contact police and say that my Hitman provider didn't deliver or that my credit card vendor gave me bad data. You're kind of out. And so as a consequence, there are legitimate actors, but there's also a large amount who are just looking to make money by preying on either the gullible or those who are new to the specific market.
As Holt explains, the dark web isn't as dark as its reputation suggests.
I know people hear the dark web and they think it's going to be this crazy part of the internet. Really, all that it is are websites that are hosted on a separate portion of the World Wide Web. You can only get there using a browser called Tor. There are other dark web sites and kind of tools that you can use, but Tor is the primary one that most people set up. And so you download Tor, it's a free package. If you've used Firefox before, that's essentially how you get to the dark web. It's a Firefox browser with this unique plugin that's there for encryption purposes. So it routes your internet traffic through other Tor users. That's how people gain anonymity using it. It's attractive because it makes it harder to identify you, and the sites that you go to are also hard to find because a true Tor site is hosted on a server that is in somebody's basement or on a server farm somewhere, and they're harder to identify than a traditional website like Google or any other sort of traditional open website that you can think of.
But that's not to say the dark web is completely crime-free.
I think it's important for people to understand that what they hear about the dark web is not what it actually is. People have this conception that it's a space where anything is possible and all things are present. And as a result, that actually can draw some people down some very criminal rabbit holes. It's very easy to find yourself in places on the dark web where there is heavily illegal content, where there's serious physical, emotional harm that can be caused to people.
Dark web use can almost lead to a false sense of security when users are searching for illegal things like facilitating a murder for hire.
People see things in the media, there's lots and lots of movies, video games, things like that, that make the dark web appear to be this place where there's hitmen, hackers, child predators, virtually anything and everything on that space is real. And in reality, yes, there's a lot of child sexual exploitation material, there's a lot of computer hackers there, but the rest of it isn't necessarily real. There are pockets of it that are, but people utilize this perception that whatever is there is real as a means to set up all kinds of fraudulent schemes. There are hitman sites, there are places where people claim to fix sporting events, sell fake art, sell gold, diamonds, anything you can think of. And they do this because people will make this assumption that it's real, and because it's hard to identify you and the people who are running the sites, well, then it must be legitimate. And so they'll go to these sites, they'll pay, and they'll assume that they're going to get whatever it is that they're paying for.
But the hitman stereotype doesn't line up with reality. You touched on it a bit, but I want to dive a little bit deeper about hitmen being portrayed in movies or TV that we, the viewer, usually has some sort of perception of what that's like. But based on the research that I read of yours, it's not what we're seeing in Hollywood.
No, about the closest depiction that I can think of is from a movie called Horrible Bosses. And I say that only because if you've seen the movie, it starts with the idea that these three people want to hire a hitman, and they wind up finding a person through Craigslist, I believe, and the person suggests that they've been in prison before, and so they're willing to do whatever is necessary. That's relatively accurate, but anything else that makes a hitman appear to be this glamorous person who gets paid on contracts to do crazy things is relatively false. Those kinds of stories are few and far between.
To hire a hitman, Holt says, is shockingly inexpensive.
If you look at the research that's been done around people who were actually paid to commit acts of violence, and there's evidence to support that they were contracted to do so, they're receiving maybe a few $1,000s. So it's not a ton of money. And the same is true with what we find on hitman sites on the dark web. They're mostly charging thousands of dollars. They're not tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so you're seeing relative parity between what is reality and what these people are presenting. I don't know why that kind of concordance is there, but if you're only charging a few $1,000s, that might make a person more willing to pay, because this seems like it's not too much of an investment. I can put this money forward if I really want to cause a person harm, and I'll get the outcome that I'm hoping for. These hitman websites are very open about their pricing models. They'll say exactly how much they charge, what they're willing to do. So that might be something as kind of simple as breaking someone's legs or trying to physically harm someone all the way up to killing someone. And some will charge different pricing if they want you to use a handgun versus something more up close and personal. So they're relatively transparent about their pricing, and they may do different things if you request, but it at least gives the buyer a sense of clarity about what I'm paying for and how much it will cost. And some will even say we only take half up front, so you're not going to be out too much money, or we require all the payment in advance, but we'll give you certain things on the back end. That to me is one of the most interesting things about a lot of the scams that you see on the dark web, is that the vendors are trying to build a sense of trust with the people who potentially go to the site. The more legitimate they appear, the less likely you might be to question, will I actually get what I'm paying for?
Is that something that you could specify on these websites? I would prefer that the person be killed in XYZ way.
Sometimes yes, but some will also indicate in their pricing that we will do things like an acid attack, or we can cause a long range shooting, or that we will make it appear like an accident. So you can, to some degree, shop around and find what vendor you want to do what specific kind of activity. So some specify it up front, and others may require you to ask for that.
It's unclear what method Rhett Barlow may have been soliciting, but police say he purchased an AR-15 and another gun before his arrest. At the time, he was based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and had been a National Guardsman since 2019. In this case specifically, the suspect, Rhett Barlow, it sounded like you had a little bit of insight into how maybe he was trying to track down a hitman.
Yes, if the reporting is correct in different media outlets, he contacted an open website and which claims to provide hitman services. What's important to note is that the dark web, all those websites end in the extension .onion. So that's how you know it's a dark web site. You can only get to those using a dark web browser. The open website that he went to ends in .com. And there's very few hitman service providers that we've ever been able to find that operate on the open web. And the site that he appears to have gone to mostly directly tells people that it is meant for humor or for to be a parody website. It is not an actual hitman service provider. They use a lot of language that would suggest this is not a place that you go to hire a hitman. It's jokey, it's structured in a way where if you're not paying attention, you might assume it's real, but if you read some of what's on the site, oh, this is definitely not legitimate. So it may be that he went to the site assuming that what I'm seeing is real. And so I'm just going to press on and contact this person and ask for what their services would be.
So in that case, is it like the people who were behind the website likely would go to police, or investigators are always tracking these sorts of websites? How do they track down these criminals?
Yes. So in this case, the site that he appears to have gone to will send that information on to police, and they've done so in the past. So they are not a credible service provider. I realize that's a bad term to use, but it's really the only way to think about it. They are not a credible hitman service provider. They have a contact form in there, and if you put it in that, and when it goes to the actual website operator, they're very quick to contact police and say, hey, I think is legitimately looking for a hitman. The other cases that have occurred on the dark web, it's unclear if those are reported out because they're operated by police, or if it's a media person who's found information. There's a handful of cases where the vendors have tried to blackmail their customers after the fact and say, you were trying to hire a hitman, I need you to pay me so I don't go to the police and tell them what you were trying to do. So there's a lot of different things that can happen. But in this case, it appears as though the legitimate site operator said, oh, this is a problem, I'm going to let police know.
Investigators say the man Barlow attempted to hire will not be charged because he reported the situation. But there's still a question that prevails. Why did Barlow attempt to hire a hitman now? I'm wondering if you have any opinion in this case, why the suspect decided to act now, so many years after the death of his mother.
That's a very hard thing to say based on the open reporting, but given it appears as though he tried to purchase multiple firearms, he's trying to move to the area, he clearly had some reason to act on this now. I don't know what it might be from just what's out there in the public reporting, but the degree to which the threat seems credible is high, especially if you're buying weapons and you're trying to move to the area. Then yeah, he's probably trying to do something immediate.
Officials say Barlow searched for the hitman back in November and was arrested in early January. He's since been charged with soliciting to commit first-degree murder, and if convicted, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. Right now, he's being held on $1 million bond. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.